Hello, yes, this is the Human Rights and Social Justice, the roundtable on vaccines and anti-vax uh, HRSJ issues. My name is Eric Bailey, and we're starting this session. And I'm going to let me just describe myself very quickly. Eric Bailey, joint appointed professor at East Carolina University, joint appointed and also director of the Ethnic and Rural Health Disparities Graduate Certificate Online Program. You can describe me as visually as a chocolate brown African American male, and in my 60s and approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall. We also have Sarah Alexander and Mark Edberg. Go right ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Alexander. I'm from or work at Baylor University. I'm primarily in the Department of Anthropology, but I have a second appointment in the Department of Environmental Science. Have been here roughly 30 years and have done or will be presenting some things that have been going on relative to this topic in a few of my research places where I've been doing research recently. I am Caucasian, 5 foot tall. Some say height challenge, some say, dynamite comes in small packages. And grew up in Washington, D.C., live in Waco, Texas.
Okay. Mark?
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Edberg. I'm a professor at George Washington University, the Public Health School, and in the Anthro Department. And I have a couple of centers. One of them is global oriented, focuses on development, and the other one works with health disparities domestically, and that's the Anti-Vax. So, I am, here we go again. I'm Caucasian, middle-aged Caucasian. I have some wire rim glasses on here. I must be the tall one in the bunch, so I'm about 6 feet. So, and if you are actually visually connected, I just admonishment to ignore my background. It's fake. I'm not really at the beach. I'm in my office, but I just put that there so you can't see all my messy papers and books. And I'll be talking about some issues with vaccine hesitancy, anti-vax, and human rights related issues, primarily for the Latino immigrant community in and around Washington, D.C., because that's where we have some projects right now.
Excellent. And again, thank you for the introduction. I want to very quickly, scope out things by refreshing everyone's memory about our abstract. So it set the stage, and then after I read the abstract, I want Sarah, you go ahead and start highlighting some of the issues, because again, this is where the reason why let me just give you a backdrop that I felt like the Human Rights Social Justice Committee needed to address this issues on both sides, the vaccine and the anti-vax related to COVID. And there's been such a controversy over this topic. So I think this roundtable session will address some of these issues. Here's the abstract. During this past year, with the pandemic of COVID-19 affecting all of our lives so many ways, and the realization that many lives were being lost, scientists eventually developed vaccines for the general public. Once the vaccines were eventually developed for the general public, once the vaccines were federally approved and distributed throughout the United States, many politicians, clinicians, and academicians, along with the general population, thought that our COVID rates would dramatically decline and our country would have this pandemic under control. However, there are thousands of individuals who have not and will not get vaccinated. The anti-vax segment of the U.S. population have their own individual rights, regardless of public health and societal pressure, to get vaccinated. In this Human Rights and Social Justice Roundtable, we're going to discuss this very controversial political medical and public health and human rights issue. And again, this is such a hot topic, and from the very start, and it continues now, even though we're having, different things, mandates being changed, and the dynamics of COVID dramatically changing across the U.S. and globally. And so I want us to, really dive into what's happening across the world, as well as here in the U.S. So Sarah, you go right ahead and provide some from your studies and your insight.
Okay. Are you sure you want me to go first? I'm only asking that because my information is internationally based.
Well,
I mean, I can. I'm
I wanted
happy
you to
to
go
do
first
so.
because I know you may have to
Oh, I
leave.
have to go. Okay, I have to leave early.
So I
Okay.
wanted to make sure you get enough time.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Just checking. So, all three of these countries that I'm going to talk briefly about, or at least introduce briefly, I'm conducting research. The research is not a coordinated research project between the three countries. So, similar kinds of research are being done in these three countries, but it's not a single project, if that makes sense. And I'm going to start and go through this. I'll just hit some high points at first to maybe tie into the discussion, and then we can come back to some of the specifics. The first country is closest to the U.S. and happens to be Belize. Former
There you
British
go.
colony. Yes, I've been doing research there for roughly almost 30 years on different topics, which I won't go into all of that. But what I will say is my most recent check of their vaccination percent is roughly, and I'm going to round up to whole numbers, is 53%. That's relatively recent. There's been a relatively recent surge in vaccinations over roughly the last 4 to 6 months. So about 6 months ago, it was 23%, just to give you some. So a 30% or an increase from 23 to 53%. And there's several different variables that have influenced that. I should say, just so you know, Belize, small country, roughly 400,000 people. I think it is relevant that the primary economic sectors are tourism and then agriculture. Particularly tourism in this case, because the government has, over the 2-year period, as it happened with everywhere in the world, took a while to sort of get our acts together, but in Belize, given their tourism dependency, well, one of their immediate reactions was to close the international airport for roughly 6 months. So nobody going in and out of Belize for the first 6 months of the pandemic. And
Actually, for 6 full months. Close. Wow.
6 full months. I don't have the
Wow.
exact date, but and they actually, it was 4 months, and then they extended it as we didn't have a vaccine. This
Yeah.
was during the time we didn't have a vaccine.
Oh, good.
And at the same time, large percent of the population is engaged in something that's related to tourism, some more directly than others, but no tourists are coming into the country, and Belizeans are pretty hesitant at that point to even move around. There are curfews at 6 p.m., etc. And so what the tourism board, the Ministry of Tourism did was to put together a set of, and this happened in other countries too, but a set of what they call gold standards that different, the hotels, all the lodging places, and then there was a separate set of standards for restaurants, but the lodging had to meet this set of roughly 8 to 10 gold standards to get this, to earn this gold standard. That meant you could have international tourists at your business. They also mandated for those folks working in those businesses that they had to be vaccinated. So when the vaccine came in, then I don't know the exact percent of people who are working in the actual lodging places, but a fair percent of people then got the first and second jab. Not the booster wasn't mandated, but the first 2 shots were mandated. Now, other factors that are affecting what has happened, and I will say that actually the World Bank is undertaking a study to now look at vaccine hesitancy, given that 53% of the population is vaccinated. You know, what's going on with the other 47%, right?
Yep.
And so that study is in process. So I don't have any results from it, but they have identified some of the more what they feel are this is paid for by the World Bank, as well as a couple of NGOs that are undertaking the study in Belize. Looking at they've targeted some vulnerable groups, more what they feel are more vulnerable groups, trying to alleviate their concerns about the vaccine, which they, it's pretty common, right? Almost everywhere that part of this equation oftentimes is concerns about the effects, that there might be effects from the vaccine itself. So part of that survey is also going to involve increasing access to credible information and trying to counteract misinformation. A couple other variables in Belize that I think are particularly, and Mark, you may have something to say about this, particularly important players are the ethnic groups. And some of these ethnic groups also have strong ties to a particular religion or set of religious beliefs. Some do not, and some do. And so I think that is a factor here. And the leaders of some of those religions or denominations, however you want to couch that. And then when you look at the second highest sector, the agriculture, it's quite varied. It's hard to generalize really about everything about that, but I will say that one of the groups in the country that is responsible for a fair amount of the agricultural production are the Mennonites. And so they have had apparently a very strong, as it's been reported in newspapers, et cetera, sort of a negation of COVID being anything that's serious. And so when there's been mandatory masking for the country, et cetera, they're mostly not abiding by that. So you have the tourism industry that's absolutely vaccinated, and I know this isn't really about masking, but then you have these other populations. And you have the Amish who are using these medicines that are for horses, right? And essentially praying, and God will take care of us. So there's a wide range.
So you mentioned the Mennonites. Well. You mentioned the Mennonites and the Amish. What percentage of the population do they consist of? Is it a large percentage or a low?
Mennonite is a fair. There's some large Mennonite communities, okay. And there's one community in particular that the phrase is that they provide all poultry, all chicken for, all of Belize, as well as some for export. I'm not sure I know the percent off the top of my head of the population that are Mennonite, but I can look that up when somebody else is talking, and I'll get back to you on that. So that's sort of an introduction to Belize. Okay. Doing this in order of percent of vaccination, my kind of middle country is halfway around the world, the Republic of Georgia, oddly enough. Okay. Which has a population of close to 5 million people, not quite. It's fully vaccinated, 34% of the population. And top economic sectors are agriculture. I don't know if you're aware of grapes and wine from Georgia. Industry, and then services. In 2008, The Georgian government also committed to developing a pretty strong, though not throughout the entire country geographically, but a pretty strong tourism industry. But it's not anywhere near as well developed as in Belize. But what's interesting I found, and what I was able to find, I've just sort of been following these countries because I do hope to continue research there, is that there's reportedly a disengagement of the medical community in Georgia, coupled with pretty conservative societal norms. That means that doctors and other healthcare workers have one of the lowest vaccination rates in the world in Georgia. Okay? So, 3,800 physicians are not vaccinated in Georgia.
Okay.
Pardon me?
What's the reason for the disengagement with the medical system?
Yeah, so one is that, one is that healthcare workers apparently have a very low understanding or poor understanding of immunology in and of itself and vaccinology in their rationalization, about COVID vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Equating it publicly on the news to a chimpanzee virus as an example. And so that's getting out obviously into the public. So those lapses in the education of the actual healthcare sector themselves is what most feel. And then I don't want to talk about it. In Georgia, also the religious leaders, faith also appears to be playing a role in promoting vaccine hesitancy in this country. So there have been a number of priests. The highest percentage of the population are members of the Georgian Orthodox Church, and priests have been openly in opposition to the COVID vaccine, saying that, quote unquote, the shots were but a trick of the Antichrist to mark his followers ahead of the ever-looming apocalypse. So when you have this being, distributed publicly, then there's a pretty big wall that you have to climb, right, to get.
Yep.
So Georgia's kind of I think is kind of an interesting case in terms of the healthcare workers situation and the doctors. And then my last country, just because I don't want to talk all the time,
That's all right.
I'm going to go back a little, and I'm going to go to Zimbabwe.
Okay.
So I was in Zimbabwe on a research and applied project literally right before March 2020 for about 4 months, but on a project that was a 5-year project. So the last time I was there was literally right before everything broke. They have a population of almost 15 million people. Their fully vaccinated population is 23%. So that may not surprise you. You sort of think of most African countries as having a low vaccination rate. But it's not by country, it's not the same in all countries. There's two larger in size ethnic groups in Zimbabwe, the Shone and the Ndebele. I happened to be working with the Ndebele when I was there. Economic sectors include the mining of diamonds, gold, some other minerals, coal. There is a tourism sector there as well, at least in certain parts of the country where there are specific attractions. Don't have time here to go into the political history and the instability and the craziness that's been going on in Zimbabwe, as well as some economic variables. There is, in 2019, an inflation rate of 241%, just to give you some idea. And when I was there, that last visit, there was zero physical currency that worked. You had to use your phone that linked up to some sort of account. but there also was no power during the day to be able to use your phone to pay for it.
Wow. Okay.
There's a lot of craziness going on in terms of that. But this article that I've looked at, that's quite recent. Let me put on my glasses, Mark.
That's one.
I have glasses too. I'm just hiding the back. Oh gosh, I know the date of this. Yeah, 2021 in the fall. So that's not too. It's pretty recent. Is the variable we've heard about is the lack of vaccine availability, so and manufacturing in even this region of the world. So that is part of it. But the second is, yes, a much more strong urban-rural divide in the situation. Much larger percent of the urban population is vaccinated, but a very fragile healthcare system. I would say across the board in both the urban and rural areas. There's a very significant shortage of healthcare workers. And the vaccine hesitancy has to do with concerns about efficacy, not understanding how a vaccine basically works, the mistrust of not only the government, but the mistrust of the healthcare system that does exist. Religious beliefs, which also, there's several different main denominations there that are almost all playing into the hesitancy. This study has identified a very strong association with low socioeconomic status in terms of hesitancy, as well as women across the board. And then, sorry, there was one other. We also find here, along with the Amish, prayer is the most effective strategy against COVID-19, much more so than the vaccine. So there's religious leaders, political leaders, community leaders, all of them not necessarily reinforcing the vaccine. So let me leave it at that, at least for now.
Excellent. That was an excellent overview of three countries: Zimbabwe, Republic of Georgia, and Belize. And now with that, I'm going to ask several questions a little bit later, but I want Mark to go ahead and provide his over his countries of his studies that he's involved with at this point in time.
Yeah, and I'll just make a quick note about Belize because I worked on and off there for a while, mostly with UNICEF, and I don't have any data to back this up. It's just based on previous issues there, because it's interesting to note, for example, that for a while Belize had the highest HIV rate in Central America too, and then a lot of things are the ethnic breakdown and marginalization of various ethnic groups in Belize is a big factor for all kinds of sort of social justice and access to services situations in Belize, and has been for a long time, because one of the, it's basically you have about 50% mestizo or Latino there, and the political ruling group for a while was primarily sort of Afro-Caribbean leftover from the British Honduras, and that's dissipating a little bit. So you have Afro-Creole, and then you have Garifuna,
Right.
which are down in the southeast region, and then you have several Maya populations, and they have been traditionally had the lowest access to all kinds of things for multiple reasons, including that. And Sarah, this is probably something you've seen many times too. Despite all the tourist literature, most of the tourist stuff happens on the Barrier Reef Islands or in the Maya Mountains, where there's sort of ecotourism. But generally speaking, Belize has a pretty poor infrastructure.
Yeah.
Wow.
And very
the
poor
roads
health.
and everything. Yeah.
Very poor healthcare system.
Very poor healthcare system, capacity problems galore. I think in one of the UNICEF studies I was working on, there was like one single child psychiatrist in the entire country, even though they have all sorts of depression rates and everything else. So some of those things are probably playing into that as well. But anyway, it's a very interesting situation, but I won't.
I was surprised the vaccination rate was as high as it was.
Yeah. There must be a coordinated They must have gotten some funding and
I think it's partially the mandate that if you're involved in tourism, you have to be vaccinated.
could be that. So I'm going to talk about one project that I'm working on now. So we are part of a team that's based at Johns Hopkins University, but it consists of ourselves, Johns Hopkins, Morgan State, Howard University, and University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And we are one of the teams. There are 20 teams funded by NIH called Community Engagement Alliance teams against COVID-19 disparities. So basically, each of the teams is supposed to, identify and work with COVID disparity populations in their area, and our area is sort of the DC, Baltimore, general metro area, and then implement and test out different sort of community engagement and communication strategies to try and up the rate of testing, vaccine uptake, and of course it's NIH, so they also want people to participate in research, so we have to kind of include that too. And our center, our part of the team, so several members of the team are working with African American populations in Baltimore and in DC, and we are primarily focusing on Central American immigrant populations. And so, to start with, thinking about, uptake of vaccines, I mean, these are generally speaking, and there's a long history here, the Central American migrant populations have been marginalized from the 1980s when they first got there as a result of fleeing from civil wars in Central America. So it is already a marginalized population that is disconnected, has been disconnected in many ways from available social services. This has improved in recent years because there are a lot of NGOs there that are now working with the community and help that situation a lot. Those migrants also come, and we did a pretty in-depth study on this, looking at trauma, migration trauma, and everything else. So people are coming there with a relatively high rate of trauma, having been victimized both in the home country because of all the political and gang violence, and on the way, and some pretty disturbing, kinds of victimizations there. So already you have that population there, only some of whom are documented, many of whom are in process of documentation because it takes such a long time to do that. And so, when COVID came along to start with, I mean, many of them were working either in construction or in restaurants or in other things like that, and so they were often the first to go. So you had people having no work right away, and then further crowding whatever apartments and other things that they were already in. So you have crowded housing, people very dependent on extended family and other sorts of social networks to get by. And the crowding, even if they got information about masking and social distancing, it was very hard to do that in many of those settings. And then you combine that with mistrust, already limited access, and in some cases, concerns about alienating these social support structures that they've relied on. So, if you're in that kind of network and you're being supported because you've got no work at this point, and people have a family or there's food being served, and you go in with a mask and things like that. I mean, people often, even if they knew or got information, they didn't want to alienate their family or social network structures by doing those things. So the rate, the COVID rate was very high right away among the Latino population. And so a number of initiatives, both in Prince George's County and in Montgomery County, kind of stepped in and tried to, address some of that. And we're a piece of that, larger effort. And so what we're doing, our particular project is, we're testing out 3 avenues for engagement and communication. One is working with a set of community clinics and working with their health promoters to use the social media networks of those health promoters to communicate out, assuming that they're already known and trusted, and using their, pushing information out through the promoters from Mary's Center, from Clínica del Pueblo, and from Proyecto Salud in Montgomery County. That's one avenue. The second is we have tried to develop a relationship with several churches. It took a little while, but we have now. One is a Catholic church, and actually they're part of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. there. And then two are evangelical Protestant churches. One is more evangelical than the other. And so we've tried to work with them in figuring out how and what we could disseminate in terms of information through those church networks. And then the third arm is there's a long-time Latino medical professional named Elmer Huerta, who has a program called Consultorio Comunitario. It's been broadcast on the radio for a long time. So we trying to work with him to push out information too. And
now let me just ask you.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you. Why did you start in the strategy? Why did you start with those particular three strategies: the community clinics, the churches, and the program? Because there's so many variables coming into play. What made you move into that direction?
There are two things. One of them is based on our past. We've had off and on interventions since actually 2005 in that community with various health disparity issues. The other is that we did do a period of formative research at the beginning of this project. It was a little bit, it wasn't huge, in-depth, formative research, but we did do key informant interviews and a series of focus groups to try and get at, trusted sources of communication. And so that was also, that also played into, the selection of who we.
So you had some additional earlier information that those types of strategies would make an impact earlier than if you tried something else.
Yeah, we did have some. And we, of course, learned some lessons there about what of those things do work and don't. And among those, are this issue, which is very similar to what Sarah was talking about. I mean, it depends on the church, but the churches were generally hesitant to have us use their social media networks and things like that to put out information advocating testing or vaccine uptake. And it was in part because the churches were trying to get back their congregations following the COVID, and so they didn't want to alienate people who were either afraid of or opposed to the vaccine in their congregations. So we could not. We had to sort of not do those kinds of activities for the churches that we were going to do, and what's turned out to be more effective is really just in person. We do a lot of tabling events, and actually the in-person activities have been much more effective at the churches. But there are some, there were some people, because we also collected baseline survey data, and we will collect follow-up data. We did get a chunk of people who were in that sort of religious population who also felt like, that vaccines were the mark of the devil, and things like this, and did not want to, get vaccines for that purpose, and believe that divine will would be the, would be the determining factor there. So we
let me just follow up. That's a very key point. How do you negotiate challenge? You want the churches involved, but they have their set of beliefs and their orientation. How do you keep them involved in the impact, while also kind of challenging some of their perceptions and some of their traditional beliefs, and moving them perhaps a little bit forward and kind of not accepting, but bringing them into what your initiative is all about?
We had to work with, first of all, we did not challenge right away. If they said we could not, couldn't this information out on their social media, or along with their, let's say, their broadcasting of sermons and services and things like that. And now there is, a lot more in person. But if we had, they said, yeah, you can, bring a table there and have people who are trusted people. So we've now integrated the promotoras, the health promoters, into those tabling events. So because some of the social media through the promoters wasn't working as well as we thought either. But so we do the events, and we have because the children's vaccine is now it will soon be available, and the vaccine for over 5 is already available. We have coloring books and other things like that we disseminate so that parents can walk by those tabling things and get coloring books for their kids. And so it's sort of deflecting, not head-on addressing some of those issues. But we did do, some work to try and figure out, the issue of misinformation, which is, this is something that's a real problem. And we, first of all, adults, we segmented the audiences just based on the formative research. Adults tend to use Facebook. Young adults and youth, it's much more the Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat and things like that. So we've been putting out. We have an operation that does put out social media information targeted to those things, but it's we have to confront. So even young adults, and they're getting a lot of information about the microchips. If you get the vaccine, that you're going to have microchips that are going to control you later. The infertility issues have come up quite a bit. The fear of these vaccines came out so fast, and so that there's a real lack of information about the process of approval, and so we've had to confront some of that, and we've also had to deal with particularly with, and I would say this is probably not just true of immigrant populations, but I guess what we could call the reliance on sort of social network bias. Social network bias through. So when people have Facebook networks, the information. They're getting information from all over the place, and and I shouldn't just say Facebook, because WhatsApp, especially for immigrant populations, they get a lot of information coming from the home country about use this thing and it'll fix, you'll cure, and that'll go through these social networks that are on Facebook, and people will really rely on those networks even more sometimes than what they hear from kind of the broadcasted news or from CDC, and they will also, and this has been one of the things that has been difficult, is that incidents that happen in that social network, that social media social network. So somebody will say, "Well, I know someone who got the vaccine and they got really sick, or they got the vaccine and they got COVID anyway, so it doesn't work." And those examples will then carry much more weight than they actually carry, statistically. And people.
So they'll have those personal experiences from a friend or a family member, and that carries even more weight than perhaps some of the other information that's coming from public health agencies.
Yep. And so people will say, "I'm not going to do it because Uncle so and so had this happen to them, or so-and-so died, they got the vaccine and then later they died," and that's hard to combat, because how do you combat that except throwing statistics and saying, in totality, that's a very, sometimes things happen, but you don't know that was a result of the vaccine, it's just that you heard this. And so that, that's one issue, but those are some of the things that have come up. And the mistrust is generally there, and so that's why we were hoping that the promotoras would counter that, because promoters are already from the community, and they're already, they've been working with the various other kinds of health issues and sort of been out there in the community. And, in fact, they do. Our initial thinking that we would use the social media networks of health promoters, that's generally not panned out. Because the promoters are often more educated than the rest of the population that they're working with, and so their own social media networks are not the community a lot of the time. So we've had to adjust that. But anyway, we run into the mistrust, the misinformation, the lack of access, and all these other factors are, they really play into whether or not people are willing to get the vaccine or not.
Mark,
Very
I have
good. Go ahead.
I have a question quickly. Do you think part of the mistrust is also a distrust of science in general?
I think
Because in
that's,
Texas, we see that, or we hear it. I was curious if you know a percent that are not vaccinated in this community. I mean, what
yeah,
are you
and
actually
this,
dealing with?
I can get that information. It's interesting because Prince George's County, these are two counties in Maryland that have high Hispanic populations, and Prince George's County has a lot less income as a county than Montgomery County. And so Montgomery County, I believe the vaccine rate now, it was not even a year ago, but the vaccine rate now among the Latino population is relatively high. It's approaching 70%.
Oh.
That's not true in Prince George's County.
Mhm.
And part of the issue there is that in Montgomery County, they have money, and they engaged they engaged a very innovative and creative sort of Latina-owned social marketing, actually minority-owned. It was just a minority and woman-owned social marketing organization that developed this little animated social media campaign called La Abuelina, the grandmother.
Mhm.
And so there are all these like little scenarios and skits where the abuelina is going, Maria, you can't have dinner unless you can't bring your people over unless you get vaccinated. And it's been very effective in cutting through, the science fog and all these other things like that. So, but it's in Montgomery County. And everybody seems to know it. They all know La Abuelina, this character was created.
Uh-huh. Maybe that's the way to go.
Yeah.
In,
Now-
Georges County.
Now, I'm glad if I could share, I'm glad each and every one of you provided an excellent overview and analysis of the different populations and countries. Now, I'm just going to share with you. I just completed a study here at East Carolina University of students, college students here in North Carolina, and I did this survey from November 2021, and it just finished in January. I sent out a qualitative survey online to over 500 students, and I was looking at the Generation Z students, Generation Z, and the goal of it was basically to find out, investigated two specific issues. One, to examine their health beliefs and preventative health patterns among the current Generation Z college student population at ECU, and two, to determine the social demographic factors predict whether a Generation Z student gets vaccinated or not. And we had the rate of those who were vaccinated was starting at 56% up to 77% of college students here at ECU. And we were struggling trying to get more students vaccinated. So I said, what are the reasons why? And I just finished analyzing the data no more than a month and a half ago. The major factors from our findings is that in our sample of this small sample of 50 students, 85% of our sample was vaccinated for COVID. The major factors which influenced the students in getting vaccinated were personal, 78%, family and friends, 71%, prevention, 63%, and school, 59%. The major factors which did not influence students in getting vaccinated were mandate. When the university said a mandate, students did not want to get vaccinated. That was 24%. Race and ethnicity, 4%. Religious, 2%. And government, 2%. So those were reasons why they did not get vaccinated. Our other finding was more women, 50% than men. 33% felt that moral values influenced their decisions to get vaccinated. And then finally, more students who identified themselves, and I mentioned politics, politically as independent or leaning independent, 31%, and no party affiliation, 24%, more than Democrats or leaning Democrats, 22%, or Republican leaning Republican, 20%, were more likely to get vaccinated for COVID. So there's these factors that come up even among our college students. And then finally, the qualitative things. I was curious, what are qualitative things for students getting vaccinated? One, they actually said, and I have several comments on this. One, they wanted the university to provide more academic and monetary incentives to get vaccinated. And two, they wanted the information that was shared on campus to be presented true and non-biased talks about COVID. So they wanted non-biased talks about COVID. They felt that there was some influence and there was too much pushing on certain ways to accept it. So again, even among our college students, there's similarities of what you just said in your findings of your own sample, that this touches a lot of segments. And I was very curious, particularly among the college students, the Generation Z students, they are very much in line of what you just said. All these cultural factors come into play. There's different other variables that come into play. They're very highly influenced by their network, their family and friends, and yet they're very skeptical about mandates, the government, and even though Generation Z students are less religious, and so they don't take on those types of activities. So again, looking at those patterns is very similar to when you dig deeper down into other groups. There's similarities here.
Let me make one quick comment.
Yes.
Because I teach at Baylor University, which is a religious institution, happens to be
Yep.
Baptist, and not as conservative as it was, I think, 30 years ago when I first came here, so there's progress being made. However, Baylor did offer monetary incentives
Oh, but
for students to get vaccinated. Just so I let you know that. A little bit of money toward tuition.
Wow.
The faculty haven't been told all of the incentives. You know, there's not
Okay.
transparency there. Probably because we probably want the incentives too, or whatever. There might be some, but yes, I think last spring and for basically 2021, both semesters, because the vaccination rate among students was much lower than faculty, and staff was in between, and they wanted that student vaccination rate up. They did not want a mandate, and so there were a number of different incentives offered that I think they were able to choose from.
Wow.
So now the student vaccination rate is close to 80%.
there
And
you go.
It was roughly 50%.
Yep. Mhm.
I don't know the exact numbers, but.
We have a mandate. We have an
Baylor
absolute mandate.
University, religious institution, offered monetary incentive.
There you go.
No, we have a mandate.
You have a mandate?
Yep,
You-
you can't, your card will not, you can't get into a building, into a parking lot or anything else unless you get, I mean, you have to be tested every 2 weeks and you have to upload your vaccination card on the common site.
And what's the reaction from the student population there?
It's, as far as I can see, I mean, it's I think, so many students wanted to get back to campus as opposed to doing the online, that, there's been very little pushback against that. So, I mean, the
And
mandate
we had a
is
lot
been-
of down here we had a lot of pushback.
yeah. This is it's not surprising, but, as anyone who's been following the media over, the last couple of years has seen over and over again, I mean, the politicization of COVID and COVID vaccines is so different than most other vaccines. Granted, I mean, there's always been a certain anti-vax segment. But this is something so
Is it,
qualitatively
and now,
different.
now I'm just going to ask, is it dramatically different from other vaccines that our country and other countries have gone through since the 1800s? I shared with you an article, and the article was fact versus fallacy, the anti-vaccine discussion reloaded, and they actually give a historical overview of this is nothing new, where vaccines as early as the 1800s with smallpox, that there was a lot of pushback. There was similar types of reactions per country. And as a matter of fact, they said that as a mandatory vaccination, and they had to sign a law, 1853, then later 1870, 67, some citizens showed resistance to what was perceived as interference into the medical decisions parents could make for their children. Vaccine hesitancy was strong then, and again, see this historically in our society with other immunization programs, vaccines. So, can we draw some connection from the past of what's happening, and then make some other solutions, come up with some new strategies? Because this is nothing. Some researchers would say this is nothing new. We're getting that hesitancy that's happened with other vaccines.
Yet, at a certain point, I mean, every parent that sends their kid to school has to get them vaccinated and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a battery of vaccines that everyone has to get it, and everybody pretty much, except for a small group of people, pretty much does it.
It would be interesting to look at the history of, and I don't know it because I was given all of those. You know, I took the smallpox, I have the polio. What the history is of having those. The only one I remember as an adult is meningitis for going to college.
Right?
And I don't remember that meeting with a lot of resistance at the
I don't
time.
remember, yeah.
But it would be interesting to know, and maybe Eric, the answer to your question is it has to be federally mandated before you can go to school, that you have whatever it ends up being, whether it's an annual COVID vaccination or whether it's something longer, hopefully, over some time that they can develop. Who knows? I mean, you know.
And it may be that resistance, you know, over time, you know, that resistance has always been there for some vaccines. Although I don't know, you know, has it been there for every vaccine that's introduced? Because there's so many, you know, vaccines. I mean, the diphtheria and, you know, pertussis. I mean, have those?
Well, Mark, you mentioned the key in your analysis. One of the big key areas was misinformation. Now, when vaccines it comes out, general public, there tends to be a lot of misinformation.
Sure.
And again, that's a pattern. How do you counteract all of that misinformation coming from public health officials? I mean, and then how it gets translated to the general public. It gets different types of interpretation of that public health information. So there's misinformation practically with every vaccine. How do you overcome that?
Yeah,
Good question.
that is a hard one. I mean, I think with COVID, I mean, that pattern of you know, resistance that you're talking about has been amplified 100 times, because it's not only resistance, it's politicization. It's become, you know, anything COVID related becomes symbolic and powerfully symbolic. And this is amplified by social media and, you know, people's coalescing into self-reinforcing social media cells and their, you know, sort of political affiliations, and that you know, that has amplified whatever mistrust and everything else that would have been there anyway for these things. But yeah, I mean, you know, there is probably, and I don't have any data to back this up, but underlying sort of commonly, at least in this country and maybe in others too, is, you know, there is the physical act of a needle going into your arm and injecting stuff. And when you don't know what that stuff is, and don't understand how it works, you know, people will resist that. I think there is probably a fair amount of fear of being injected with something when you don't know what it is.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think part of the equation also has to do with time. I mean, obviously, we're living through this.
Yeah.
It's happened, if you think about it, very quickly. So
Yeah.
within roughly a year, there was the vaccine rollout, at least in this country. Thank goodness, as far as I'm concerned. But I won't sit here and have zero anxiety when I went and got that first jab. I went and got it because
Yeah.
I weighed, pros and cons, and I am wondering if education, level of general education has anything to do with, and distrust of science and understanding of science has anything to do with this. But I
It
also
probably
know
does.
highly educated people who haven't gotten vaccinated, but I'm in Texas. So
But Sarah, you bring up a great point that even when you got vaccinated, there was still that question, Mark, for you, and you knew that
I mean, I did it.
take it. So what really?
I sat there for 15 minutes, kind of wondering, and nothing happened. So I drove home, and whatever, had a little side effects, but yeah, I won't lie that I wasn't at all anxious, particularly with the first one. I won't lie about that.
I think that happens with all of us. I mean, when they again rolled it out here, I was matter of fact, I kind of waited because I didn't want to be the first one in they had priority groups, the priority 1 group, priority. My family and I, we waited a little bit before it truly rolled out into a large scale.
More had it.
Yeah, large scale.
Yeah.
Vaccination centers, and then we said, let's go then, not the first route, but let's go when it's really out there. And then that's when we got vaccinated, and then returned, got double vaccinated. But there was that hesitancy for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, and in this country, of course, it's been, it's been linked to arguments about personal freedom and all these, abridgment of personal freedom by liberal elites and all these other things. And I don't think that argument has been effectively countered at all, and never was. I think the communication on the vaccine, disseminator on the public health side was terrible about that in trying to address that, and still is. I mean, my question, and I actually have a song about this with a video that has an American flag on it. If you want it, I'll post it.
Yeah, please do.
You're not going to sing it for us?
Well, I never play anything that's country music, and that's just never my, but I wrote this one in a country music style, and I used words about, I'm for freedom and everything else, but then I say, freedom never meant that anything goes, and then I ask, do you drive on the right side of the road, and stuff like that, because people equate this mandate with this, it's because that's how it's been portrayed, but by Newsmax, by Fox News, by Tucker Carlson and company, and so on and so forth, and people really, are virulent about this issue of abridgment of personal freedom when that argument has really not been countered. I mean, if you ask somebody that simple question, do you drive on the right side of the road? I mean, is that an abridgment of your freedom? I mean, why not drive on the left side of the road? For the obvious reason. You will get killed or somebody else will get killed. So, and people don't, and I think there's a combination of the science ignorance there too, because people don't understand. It's not about just your self-protection, but it's about, the prevention of replication. People don't get that, when you are not vaccinated, you are a potential incubator of variants. And so you're harming other people when you do that. And so, I think it always seemed to me that if the argument had been made much more effectively about, this isn't just about you. This is about, treating your community well and treating your family and your friends well, so that you don't increase the likelihood that they'll get sick. I mean, sure, that's been out there, but it's just not. It always seems like such a no-brainer counter to the personal freedom argument, because there's so many things people do. I mean, people can say, well, if you have a house and you have a little something in your house that's polluting your neighbor's yard, is that okay? I mean, is it an abridgment of freedom that says you shouldn't do that and you should be locked up? No. I mean, who thinks it's okay to to harm your neighbor?
Well,
Well,
I think
doing
you bring
that.
up, yeah, I think you bring up some excellent points, and yet I think it's also critical to, really do a deeper dive of that other component, the anti-vaxxers, of how and why that movement continues. And I'm going to go back to that to the article, because I just want to read a couple of snippets from this article, because they conclude saying that the anti-vaccination movement is actually a promising feature of human development, as it demonstrates the widespread tendency of individuals to think critically and independently. This is in order to sustain global vaccination rates sufficient to maintain herd immunity. Scientists must have to adapt their approaches to research, while public health officials adapt their approaches to raising awareness to address the anti-vax movement. Specifically, scientists must learn how to expose local fallacies and other problems with denialism, and public health experts must elevate the use of storytelling over data presentation. And here's the last caveat: it is fear, misinformation, mistrust, and that are driving the anti-vax movement. And scientists, the healthcare profession, and public health must provide open discourse, open discussion, and fair and accurate information that can assure the public to reinforce their despair. So again, having a fair dialogue, an open dialogue, to dig deeper into those health beliefs, those hesitancy patterns, so that we can learn more about both sides. And that's where I saw the role of the applied anthropologists, us as applied anthropologists, being on both sides, understanding here's those who are vaccinated, here are the reasons why. Here are the anti-vaxxers, here's the reason why they. Let's try to bring these two entities more so together. And that's what the article is actually saying. Let's understand, because this is going to happen again and again.
Although I think the article leaves out one very important issue, and that probably among others, but
That's true.
and that is the connection that people make between vaccines and some of these things, and these these webs of meaning, these social worlds of meaning. So the vaccines aren't just vaccines per se; they are symbols of your belonging to one world or another.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
people are often unwilling to, despite regardless of the science arguments, are unwilling to violate something that will alienate them from the social world that they have now, identified with and been connected with. And that's true probably for anti-vaxxers of both sort of the left and right, perspectives. I mean, getting vaccinated means you are fill in the blank. You have succumbed to the leftist elite, or you're, a stooge for corporate, whatever it is, or, you name it. So, and that is a little more difficult, how to pry away vaccination from its identification with, worlds of coherence.
One of the frustrations I have found, and this is based on anecdotal information, is, and friends, or people I know, not necessarily friends, but anyhow, acquaintances, is along the lines of what you're saying is, and I keep coming back to the science, but people I know who have not gotten vaccinated, but who have very serious health issues, and who are being treated, in one case by roughly 10 doctors. And this person is being treated, constantly going to doctors, constantly accepting those treatments, some of which are actually new, some are not. But some are newish treatments, similar to perhaps this sort of the idea of this vaccine, but absolutely anti-vaxxer. And I can't personally reconcile that. You know, I'm just like, I don't, because if you want to have control over your own body and not lose that freedom, then how does that person reconciling that with treatment of very serious illnesses? Because COVID also kills.
Yep.
This illness is probably going to kill this person, or this person's not going to live much longer, put it that way. But I don't know. Maybe I'm confused.
No,
But to me,
bring up a great point. Do you think-
parallel argument
Yep.
that doesn't make sense to me.
And are people more readily to suffer from other ailments other than COVID? I mean, because that's where it's coming from. Because as you know, a lot more people, unfortunately, the mortality for dying of other diseases increased because individuals, they were hesitant to get vaccines, and those who eventually arrived were in the highest state of emergency, and they would rather suffer from something else other than COVID.
But this person is going to doctors for treatment, but not for treatment of serious illness, but not willing to get vaccinated to prevent that illness from happening.
So for this person you're talking about is anti-vaccination of any kind.
I'm
not
not.
just COVID.
I'm not aware of that. I haven't had that conversation.
Oh, but COVID, at least just COVID.
You know, he's 70-ish, so I'm guessing he's had childhood vaccinations. Yeah.
So what are some of the takeaways from our discussion? I mean, we covered so many countries. We covered a variety of case studies, even college students and different countries and specific ethnic groups. What are some of the takeaways from this continual debate of vaxxers, anti-vaxxers, and vaccination folks? Where can we move this move the needle to before something else happens, before another pandemic situation happens?
Well,
And I would say that at least one, and this is not all of the things, but at least one of the things is belonging. When you have alienation, you have, the vaccines become placed into a camp. They become placed into a camp of the people who are either opposing you, oppressing you, or different than you in some way. And, the more, let's say, with a given marginalized population, and, I'm thinking here about sort of the common Tuskegee influenced, hesitancy in some of the African American population too to get vaccinated because of that, historic exploitation. But if people are more involved in the process and knowing about how a vaccine is created, disseminated, and so on and so forth, I mean, that itself might, over the long term, at least play one small role in reducing that gap. I mean, let's say in the Latino population, if it's a Latino doctor who helped invent the vaccine, and it's it's not just those other people who are the potential oppressors who are administering it to me. And the same would be true. I mean, closing that social justice gap, probably it wouldn't address all those issues that we talked about, but it would be one thing.
But it is actually the case that there was an African American biologist who was involved in the creation of one of the mRNA vaccines.
Yes,
and so I don't know how widely that information was shared. But
hello, Stephanie.
Hello, Eric. But one of the things, I'm sorry, I had to pop in on that one.
Go
because,
ahead, please.
Mark was making that comment about, being able to see sort of people like you who are involved in this. But, part of the, I think part of the issue, and I'm sure that you've already discussed this because I came in late, is actually the really appallingly low level of science literacy in this country, right? And so even when the information is out there, and the fact that we are in our sort of media silos, so people listen to other people who affirm their beliefs, and so they don't actually have the opportunity to learn who was involved in making the vaccine, and they don't have the opportunity to learn about how, you know, how variants actually come to be, that by not getting vaccinated they're giving the virus another shot at life, right? And so yeah, it's a concerning, because we can talk about all of that verisimilitude, and if people aren't hearing, then it kind of doesn't help. And so yeah, the question always, to me at least, comes down to how is it that we can engage communities in meaningful dialogue and discussion, the point that you were making. But I think that there's also a distinction that needs to be made here, because people conflate folks agreeing with them with the conversation being fair, right? Right? And those aren't the same thing, right? If I tell you about virus replication and I say, you know, that you're mistaken about how it is, you know, that you believe this is happening, that's not an unfair conversation, but that's how it's frequently construed, right? Facts and
we were talking about that, you know, that whole coherence group, you know, issue.
Very good point.
I think both Mark and Eric's studies make good point, demonstrate a good point, building on what Stephanie just said, which is to, one, this takes a little time, but we have a lot of methodologies now where we can do things quite rapidly, is to understand the context of the situation. Be it hesitancy to get vaccinated, be it anti-vaxxer, those are related but different balls. In the countries that I talked about, some of the other variables, be it ethnicity, be it actual medical profession and what their reaction has been, you know, to understand the context of the hesitancy. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but we didn't do it in this country. And then these, I'll call them subpopulations for now, but here we have the Latino X population, we have young adults who may or may not be students. You know, we have things by age, by gender, by occupation, by level of education, by ethnicity, whatever, all of it, by religion. You know, that's not all the factors, but to understand all of that, and then as anthropologists, like Eric was saying, I mean, I think we can play that, I guess I'll call it a traditional role of culture broker with agencies, health agencies, or whoever else can help engage to reach specifically those populations, like some of the examples that Mark was talking about in terms of, okay, let's go to the churches and let's see what they can do. Okay, they don't want to do this, but maybe we can do this, you know? Because just broad spectrum, you know, I mean, I don't have anything against Fauci or anybody else, but broad spectrum announcements that are talking to the entire population are not getting at the heart of what we've been talking about today. And in these other respective countries that I talked about, same parallel arguments could be made.
Very good point, Sarah. I think, again, it's so critical to bring in how we apply anthropologists can be those cultural brokers, can be break down this information to all communities, but also what you had indicated that with belonging and having those substantial individuals who look like the community, conveying that information on a national level, not just, as you just indicated, having NIH, Fauci, and the CDC director making announcements. We need more individuals at the forefront making these announcements and walking the information through at its beginning. And again, I think that's highly critical that we learn that this is one of our takeaways. We cannot do it the same way.
Everywhere, right?
If we do, we're going to have the same reaction.
And, you know, I think, you know, given the success of like this La Abuelina campaign, I mean, I mean, people don't, just in terms of the basic science, and this isn't to be elitist or whatever, because this stuff is hard to understand sometimes. I mean, like take the mRNA vaccine. That process is, that's not, it's a complicated process for people to understand, what happens when that vaccine goes in there. So, I mean, a lot of creative work is necessary to develop, a little animation or, some other little thing that goes out there so people can figure out, oh, okay, so that's what this is, and I don't think a lot of that is out there. There just is not a lot of that, reduction of these complex interactions that a vaccine promotes into interactions that people can understand. Even if they had basic high school biology, may not, get this. So.
Yeah, and relates also to, again, what Stephanie said about the meaningful dialogue. We need more meaningful dialogue from not just at the beginning, but as things kind of change with COVID, we needed more meaningful dialogue in each community and all different types of segments of society, but also sharing that information to pockets of hard to reach communities. As Mark, you said, the immigrant populations, particularly in Baltimore and in Montgomery County. I mean, that's how you get more buy-in as information is shared with communities that are just not involved with the mainstream. I'm saying the mainstream health education information.
Yeah.
And again, I'm trying to summarize everything. Are there any other key points that we should state at this point in time? Because again, it seems like we're coming across this chasm where, okay, we have this issue, and we've already stated some of the takeaways. What can we share with those who are going to see this session? What can they tangibly take away and provide their own research or their own student population when they go back to their universities or their place of business? What's the final takeaway?
Well, I mean, again, among other things, I mean, because, vaccinations are so associated, again, with these, divisive worlds and divisive world views in that way. I'm going to
stop you right there. Why is it so divisive now? How can we reduce the divisiveness? Because that's what's going to continue to keep us separated. You're saying those key words. Why can't we bring those divisive worlds together, whether it's politically, economically, educationally, ethnically? How can we bring it together?
I mean, looking for themes that are common across groups that you could attach something like the vaccine to. I mean, not to be corny, but if you were gonna, and this maybe it wouldn't work or anything, but I'm just throwing this out. I mean, let's say if you assumed that most Americans are patriotic Americans. I mean, there's a theme that's, right and left, cuts across a lot of political divides. Now, I'm not saying that would be effective. That's pretty corny, but something like that where the vaccine gets attached to a common theme. We all care about family. We all care about, our community and things like that. And so, I don't think any of that. I have seen some more recent ads that do play on that a little bit, but attaching vaccine to broader community themes. We want our community to do well, so help it. Do your part. That may have some effect at cutting across the divide.
You bring again. That is the key, because finding the commonality, and I'll relate this to my college students many times, and I teach a race and ethnicity class. Most of the students in my classes and in your classes as well, many times they think they're so separate, they're so different from one another. But when you have an exercise to bring them together and look at what they have in common, guess what? They really work together and moving forward in the classroom. So I recognize that there's so much divisiveness even in my classrooms over the years, and then how can I bring them together? Same way with the vaccine. How can we bring folks together? And you just indicated finding those broader issues, those common grounds, common issues that can bring folks together, at least at the beginning and towards the end.
I'd be happy to play if anybody wants to. I have that little YouTube with.
Do you have it?
I think I can pull it up real quick. It's not that well recorded. It was just recorded on my Mac, and then I found an American flag. But if you want to see, it was an attempt to do this, in a very crude way to link getting a vaccine to a broader theme. So if you want to hear it, I'll pull it up.
We have time. We have 15 more minutes. Do we have 15 more minutes? I think we have 5 or 10 more minutes. And we want any other questions along the way?
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah.
Are there, Stephanie brought up a great question. Susan, do you have a question? Aylin, anyone in the, Judy, do you have a question? Again, we made a case for brought in all these compelling issues, compared different scenarios, and then, what are some of the questions that you may have from the audience? Because this is an issue that will continue to move to another level, and because as we all know, now we're in a different phase of opening up society, reducing the mandates. I just saw in New York City that they reduced the mandates of those who are not vaccinated, and allowing folks to really participate in all different types of activities, and yet we're going to come across another push of sometimes some other mandates if we see the rates increase in certain areas. So any other questions? I got one question. I like from Jude, I think Jude, wait, I like more about the linking science literacy with community-based research. Yeah. Mark, what about the linking science literacy with community-based research?
Oh, I absolutely, I think that's absolutely necessary, and among other things, in just trying to figure out if you're doing community-based or participatory research, how it is that people could receive certain kinds of information, trying to understand, there's no way to know this without community-based participatory research, and no way to develop some kind of effective communication strategy for things that are science-related without it. I think it's absolutely required.
Yeah, particularly how each and every community is so uniquely different.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up the communities and the populations, because from one community to another, you need that specific information that is unique for that community, that neighborhood, so they can better understand what are the major public health strategies and link that to the latest science. So do you?
I would follow the follow on to the comment. Can they, be involved in? Absolutely, and actually, in our little project, they are.
Good.
So we have the social media stuff is all generated by. There's a project it's part of our project. The social media is actually called the Brigada de Salud.
Brigada.
And it's all, that is all Latino run, and the messages and strategies are generated by the people who are running that, not by us.
So the community is involved in revising and making it more culturally competent along their way of changing strategies. So it's highly important to have the community involved and refining your messages.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I find that, again, this is another role for applied anthropologists to be out there in the community, constantly engaging with the nuances of the community and finding out. And I was kind of surprised that it cuts across so many different communities and so many different segments of society, that if we're constantly engaging, constantly gathering new information, we can tailor make our messages to each and every neighborhood, community, and make it more relevant, so they can, at least come and have a common ground. So again, I think that answers one of the questions. Any other questions at this point in time? I think we've handled several questions at this point in time, and I really want to hear your song. You got me intrigued about.
Okay, I'll see if I can, if nobody minds, I'll see if I can pull it up here. Let me see if I can.
I mean, that's what we do here in the Human Rights Social Justice Roundtable. We bring in all different types of social media to broaden our understanding of the issue. So this is excellent.
I think my screen sharing is disabled, so somebody's going to have to enable me.
Hold on. See if I can.
Again, this was my, well, it's a YouTube.
I don't know if I have the control. Hold on. That's my screen, but I can't.
If you go to participants, Eric, excuse me, Susan, if you're the host, yeah, you are the host, go to participants at the bottom, and it pops up. You can make Mark a host. You can make him the host, and then he can share.
Okay, Mark. I see your name, Mark, and I'm pressing your name.
Let's see if it works. Okay. All right. Let me give it a shot here. Can everyone hear?
There you go. Keep going.
Oh wait, this isn't the YouTube, but oh well.
You're in control. Do you hear it?
No.
Oh, you don't?
Mm-mm.
Let me pull it. Let me stop it. You don't hear it?
No.
Let's see. How do we? How do we make that happen?
I'm honestly not sure about that.
Oh, all right. It's okay.
You could give us the YouTube link, Mark, and we could go look later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send the YouTube link,
Okay.
and you can laugh or not. It was my crude attempt to try and talk about that vaccines using themes that I thought were, cross-cutting in some way.
Now, how do we get back to? There you go. So with that, we tried, and you're going to send us the link,
I'll send you the link.
and I'm going to give you a comment back, and of your song and everything, cause
Okay.
that's one of our takeaways, Mark. You're going to get a response from your song and everything, and how it relates. That's our exercise for the rest of the year. So
Okay.
that's excellent. That's an outstanding takeaway. So again, I'm not going to take up any more time. I think we covered the major issues and really addressed the issues of the vaccines versus anti-vax issues. And this is a human rights and social justice issue. We need to take ownership of it. We need to continue dialogue, dig deeper into the dialogue on both sides, and again, try to find a more common ground and utilize our opportunities as applied anthropologists to bring folks together. Because otherwise, again, like I said, like each and every one of you said, there's continue to be a divisiveness and a lack of togetherness and understanding how we can overcome some of these issues that's going to happen again, you know. So again, thank you so much. Any other comments, Mark or Sarah or Stephanie or Susan?
To everybody
you.
for listening. Thanks, Eric,
Yes.
for putting it together.
I want to thank everyone for participating. I know it's always challenging to do these virtual sessions, but I think we did an outstanding job again. I mean, we are a team, Mark and Sarah and I. So thanks again. Have a great session, and please like our session as well, and give positive. Give positive response of our session, and do not hesitate to email me as well. Any other suggestions? So thank you again. Thank you for your time. Have a great session and a great weekend.
Sounds good. All right, you too.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mark.